The candle had burned low, casting uneven shadows on the uneven stone wall. Eleanor sat cross-legged on a wooden stool, a warped bronze mirror propped before her. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. "You're still up," came a voice, hushed but curious. Her cousin Juliet leaned in through the tapestry-curtained doorway. She had already plucked her brows until they were nearly gone. Her scalp ached where she'd pulled back the hairline inch by inch. "You look like a ghost," Juliet muttered. "That's the idea," Eleanor said. The next morning came without color. Eleanor dressed in silence, her maid scuttling about with pins and linen. "Leave it tilted back," she instructed. At breakfast, the air was thick with steam and social pressure. "She takes after her mother," Lord Felix replied. "Discipline in all things." Later that day, Juliet found her pacing the cold gallery. "You'd rather marry a duck," Juliet teased. "Then I'll learn to do it without moving my mouth." In her chamber, she unrolled a small cloth bundle filled with tools. Eleanor nodded. "It keeps them white." Juliet watched in quiet horror, and just then, the bell rang in the courtyard. She rose, fixed her hennin, and painted serenity across her face. Her mouth stayed shut. Her brow stayed smooth. Her skin stayed pale. She watched the procession enter the courtyard. A tall man wrapped in a crimson traveling cloak. Dark eyes set into a pale face. "Sir Aldrich," her father said behind her. "I wished to see how you fared without preparation." "He's better looking than the onion boy," Juliet said. A pinch of crushed rose was dabbed under her eyes, not for beauty, but to reduce the swelling. "He's better looking than the onion boy," Juliet said. A pinch of crushed rose was dabbed under her eyes, not for beauty, but to reduce the swelling. Eleanor stepped across the threshold with the calm, gliding steps she had practiced since girlhood. His cloak had been removed. He looked every inch the polished nobleman. "Do you eat?" he asked. "I do what is necessary." "I see," he said. And something softened in his gaze, not admiration, but pity. At the table, Sir Oswin had already begun eating. A thin broth was ladled into her bowl. "You're quieter than I imagined," Aldrich said. She sat on the stool before her mirror and removed her veil. Bits of chalk dust fell into her lap. The girl in the mirror looked fragile. But that wasn't quite right. "He seemed almost human," Juliet said. "I made sure he didn't." "One day someone will make you laugh," Eleanor replied. "Then I hope it's after I'm married. Do you ever wonder what your face looks like without all that?" The question felt like a knife placed gently on the table between them. "I had a dream last night. You were painting a picture, but every time you added color, someone scraped it away. Was it a good picture?" "No. It was honest." She stepped into the hallway and walked toward the chapel. Eleanor did not envy her the dream. She had other dreams once, where she stood in front of a mirror and saw nothing at all. The chapel was nearly empty when Eleanor entered. Cold seeped up through the flagstone floor, chilling her through the soles of her shoes. She knelt in the second pew from the front, not out of piety, but because that pew sat in the perfect shadowed pocket where no priest or guest could clearly see her face unless she tilted upward. And she never did. Father Gerald began the prayer in Latin, voice dry as old parchment. Eleanor bowed her head just enough to look devout. In truth, she was counting her breaths. She always did in the chapel. It passed the time and kept her face serene. When the bell rang to signal the end of the brief service, she rose, made the sign of the cross, and turned quietly down the aisle. She nearly made it to the door before a voice stopped her. "My lady," Sir Aldrich said. He stood near the doorway, shoulders wrapped in a plain wool cloak, his hair uncombed in a way that made him look more real than anyone else in that building. "Sir Aldrich," she answered, voice still quiet. "Even here, even now, you rise early." "I attend chapel every morning." He smiled faintly. "Even in winter." "Especially in winter." "Are you trying to impress the Lord above," he said, "or the ones watching from below?" Eleanor didn't respond right away. "I don't know the difference anymore." He studied her, not in the way other men did, but like someone turning over a puzzle piece and wondering if it fit. "May I walk with you, if you like?" They stepped into the courtyard. A light snow was falling, fine as sifted flour. It dusted Aldrich's shoulders, but melted on Eleanor's veil. Their footsteps crunched on the path of frozen mud. "Your cousin," he said, after a time. "She's different from you. She is. You envy her." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "No." He glanced at her. That was quick. "I don't envy the freedom of someone who can laugh at supper, because no one's watching her. I think someone is." Eleanor pressed her lips together, not smiling, not frowning either. Her expression had learned the art of neutrality. "Long ago. If you're trying to flirt with me, it's unnecessary. My father has likely already chosen you." "That's not what I'm trying." "Then what are you doing?" He shrugged. "Trying to find out who you are beneath the chalk." The words cut deeper than she expected. She paused beneath the archway that led to the herb garden, now dead beneath frost. "No one asks that." "Then they've been asking the wrong questions." Eleanor didn't look at him. "The answers are the same either way. A lady is what she appears to be, even if she's miserable, especially then." He didn't speak again until they reached the edge of the frozen pond. The water shimmered like glass, a mirror smoother than the bronze one in her chamber. "I had a sister," he said. "She died last spring." Eleanor turned to him, caught off guard. "I'm sorry." She was supposed to marry this winter. Her betrothed was a baron's son, older by 12 years, but he had wealth, land, good bloodlines. Everyone approved. She didn't. What happened? She stopped eating, slowly at first, then completely. Eleanor said nothing. She wasted away over the course of 4 months. My father called for physicians. My mother prayed. She refused them both. Was she punished? "She was buried," Aldrich replied, still in her wedding gown. Silence fell again. Eleanor found herself studying his face, the unguarded edges of it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind me of her." She stepped away. "I'm not your sister." "No," he said softly. "But you're on the same road." The words rang in her ears for hours afterward. That night, Eleanor sat before her mirror and did nothing. No paste, no chalk, no plucking. She stared at her reflection, the way her cheeks still held a hint of roundness, how her forehead bore faint shadows from earlier powdering. Her eyebrows had not fully grown back. Her lips were dry. For the first time, she didn't look beautiful by courtly standards, but she looked human. Juliet entered and froze. "You're not getting ready?" "I'm not attending supper." "Tonight?" Juliet stepped closer. "Are you ill?" "No." Juliet tilted her head. "Then why?" Eleanor looked down. "I wanted to see what it felt like. To do nothing. Strange, isn't it?" Juliet said, "How doing nothing feels harder than doing everything." By morning, the chambermaids were talking. Lady Eleanor had not appeared for supper. She had not taken broth or wine. She had not worn chalk or veil. A few whispers reached Lady Margaret's ears, and by mid-morning, Lord Felix summoned his daughter to his study. She entered with her hair uncovered, her cheeks bare, and no powder hiding the freckle on her chin. Felix looked up from his letters. "What is this? I was unwell." "You look well now." "I recovered." His eyes narrowed. "Are you losing your discipline?" "No, father. I received a note this morning from Lady Margaret. She was displeased by your absence." Sir Oswin was confused. "Then he's more delicate than he looks." His chair scraped the floor as he stood. "You will not make jokes. You will not insult your prospects." "I didn't. You're the daughter of a noble house. That means something. Your duty is not comfort. Your duty is legacy." She lowered her gaze. "I know. Then act like it tonight. You will appear as you are expected to. No further rebellion." "Yes, father." As she turned to leave, he added, "And if you ruin this, I'll send you to the convent. You can fast for virtue there instead." That afternoon, she returned to the mirror. This time, the chalk went on thicker. The paste stung deeper. She plucked, not just to shape but to punish. The skin along her forehead burned. Juliet stood watching her from the doorway. "He'll never see your real face again, will he?" "Not if I can help it." "You liked him?" Eleanor didn't reply. The feast that night was more elaborate than usual. 3 roasted birds, pomegranate sauce, pears preserved in honey, fine spiced wine. Eleanor sat beneath the bannerman, of her house, and offered no opinion on anything. She said little. She smiled less. Sir Aldrich was seated beside her. She could feel him watching, but she didn't meet his eyes. "You look lovely tonight," he said quietly. She nodded in acknowledgement. He tried again. "Your cousin says you draw. Is that true?" "Yes." "What do you draw?" "Things I don't see in the mirror." He paused. "May I see sometime?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you might think they're real. And they aren't. They're the only things that are." He sat back. "Then you are more honest than you seem." She looked at her goblet. "Or more cowardly." Later that night, she found herself unable to sleep. The fire had burned low again, casting the same old shadows across the same stone wall. She rose, walked barefoot to the mirror, and sat before it. She didn't touch the paste or chalk. She picked up a piece of charcoal instead. She drew on the back of a ledger sheet a girl sitting at a pond, her veil trailing into the water. Her reflection looking back at her, not with piety, but with sadness. She shaded in the hairline, lower than her own. She added eyebrows, then she stopped. In the corner of the page, she signed the drawing with a single mark. E. She folded it into quarters and slid it beneath her mattress. In the weeks that followed, Aldrich stayed longer than expected. He made no formal proposal. Rumors said he was waiting, testing her, or testing her father's patience. One morning, as Eleanor stood in the cloister, feeding crumbs to the birds, he approached without announcement. "I'm leaving tomorrow." She didn't answer. "I won't be coming back." "Then the marriage is off." He smiled faintly. "It never started." She looked at him finally. "Why?" "Because I want to remember you the way you were when you weren't performing." She turned away. "Then you saw something I didn't." "I did," he said. "But you buried it again." She didn't stop him from walking away. She didn't cry either. Later that night, she sat before her mirror again. She drew another face. This one was smiling. 2 months passed. Spring thawed the garden. The ponds rippled again. Bees returned to the ivy on the wall. Eleanor still wore her veil, still plucked, still painted her face, but something had changed. Once a week, she skipped the chalk. Once a month, she walked barefoot in the garden. Once, she laughed. Only once, but it had happened. Juliet noticed. So her cousin said one morning, "What will you do if father sends another suitor?" "I'll consider it, even if you have to pretend again." Eleanor pulled the drawing from beneath her mattress and studied it. Pretending is a skill. So is choosing when to stop. Juliet smiled. "You're not giving up, are you?" "No," Eleanor said softly. "Just deciding what part of me the world is allowed to see." She placed the drawing face up on her desk and turned the mirror to face the wall. Then she sat down and picked up her charcoal, asked ChatGPT. The first time Eleanor wore the ceremonial blue, it felt like armor. She stood in the great hall, with her arms raised as 2 maids draped the silk over her shoulders. The gown was older than she was, passed down from her grandmother, then her mother, now to her. It had been altered at the sleeves, lengthened at the hem, but its weight remained the same, heavy with meaning, heavier still with history. "Don't breathe too deeply," Juliet whispered, lacing up the back. "The seams were stitched for your mother's ribs, not yours." Eleanor did not smile. Her breath stayed shallow. The silk settled over her body like a verdict. Today was not just a feast. It was a public vow. The highborn families of 3 counties would gather at the estate for spring tribute, an annual display of allegiance and hierarchy. It was where marriages were discussed in half-spoken phrases, where alliances bloomed or withered with a glance, and where noblewomen were expected to shine like polished silver, silent, brilliant. Unyielding. Eleanor turned toward the tall mirror propped against the wall. Her reflection greeted her like a stranger. The chalk on her cheeks had been expertly applied. Her forehead gleamed. Her eyebrows were faint shadows above her eyes. The veil framed her face like parchment inside a gilded book. "You look," Juliet hesitated, "exactly like they want you to." Eleanor nodded. "That's the point." She descended the staircase without a sound, the silk trailing behind her like a second spine. In the hall below, voices murmured as banners were unfurled and tables set. Her father stood near the dais, deep in conversation with a tall woman in fur-lined robes, Lady Renata, widow of the Duke of Marvo, and current matchmaker of terrifying efficiency. Renata saw Eleanor, and smiled with all the warmth of cold steel. "Ah, the daughter arrives." Eleanor bowed. "My lady, stand up straight, child. Let me see the frame." Eleanor obeyed. Her mother's posture lessons had trained her well. Shoulders drawn back, chin tilted, hands folded gently in front. She didn't blink. Renata circled her like a jeweler inspecting a gemstone. "You are the image of your mother," she declared, before the years softened her face. Eleanor took it as a compliment, though it didn't feel like one. "Lady Renata has 3 sons," Felix said. "2 are already matched. The third is discerning," Renata finished. "He has refused 5 offers already. Then he'll refuse a 6th, Eleanor said. The room stilled. Felix turned sharply. "You will not speak like that." But Renata's smile deepened. "Oh, let her speak. I prefer a girl with a spine, even if she must learn when to bend it." Eleanor stared at her. "Why must it be bent at all?" "Because the world is not shaped to fit you. You are shaped to fit it." Those words stayed with her through the feast. The tribute gathering swelled by noon. Carriages arrived. Trumpets blared. Knights bowed. Pages ran messages between tables. From her place at the high table, Eleanor watched it all with practiced serenity. She said little. She smiled faintly when required. She folded her napkin precisely and sipped wine without staining her lips. A young lord from House Varnier sat to her right. He tried 3 different opening remarks before settling into silence to her left. Her father beamed with satisfaction. "She's perfect," she heard him whisper to Renata between courses. "No scandal, no complaints. She'll make an excellent wife," Renata agreed, "as long as the husband has no taste for rebellion." The roasted quail on Eleanor's plate went untouched. Hours later, the dancing began. Couples formed and reformed across the polished floor. Eleanor danced. Twice, once with a visiting baron, once with a merchant's son who had purchased his title and wore it poorly. Their hands were clammy, their movements stiff. No one asked her questions. No one noticed her discomfort. She was admired, praised, observed. She was not known. That night, when the hall emptied and the candles smoked low in their sockets, Eleanor returned to her chamber and collapsed into the chair beside the hearth. She peeled off the gown inch by inch, each movement loosening some hidden weight from her spine. Juliet entered quietly, holding a plate of cold pears and honeyed bread. "You ate nothing," she said, placing the food on the table. "I wasn't hungry." Juliet sat on the rug near the fire. "They all loved you." "That's not love." "No, but it's useful." Eleanor stared at the firelight dancing in the hearth. "I felt like a picture today," she said. They all smiled at me like I was already hanging on their wall." Juliet didn't answer. After a while, Eleanor reached under her bed and pulled out the stack of drawings. Dozens now. Faces with real expressions. Smiles, tears, raised eyebrows, crooked teeth, messy hair. A woman laughing with her mouth open wide. Another sneezing. One bending to pick a flower, hair falling loose around her ears. They were portraits. Of no one and everyone. "Burn them if I'm married off," she whispered. "Promise me." Juliet leaned closer. "No." "Why?" "Because someone should remember what your face actually looked like." A week later, a courier arrived from House Trenmore. Sir Aldrich was not among the riders. Instead, he sent a sealed letter and a package. Eleanor read the letter in silence, standing near the window. He was in Marseille now. He had joined a delegation bound for Cyprus. He did not mention courtship. He did not speak of longing. He wrote only this: "I met a girl once who tried so hard not to be seen. She vanished, and yet I still see her, even now. I hope she is beginning to draw herself back." Inside the package was a small silver mirror, untarnished, unmarked, empty of instruction. Eleanor set it on her writing desk beside her ink and parchment. She did not look into it yet. Spring deepened. The plum trees bloomed. Court life shifted to lighter fabrics, brighter tapestries. Eleanor wore softer colors, now pale greens, dove gray, but she still plucked, powdered, and posed, because that's what the game required. Still cracks had formed in the walls. At supper, she laughed once too loudly. Her mother looked scandalized. Her father dropped his fork. She apologized without sincerity. At chapel, she did not kneel. She stood through the whole service, head high. The priest stared at her like she had grown horns. She told Juliet, "I'm tired of pretending to be a saint." "Then don't. It's not that easy." "Maybe not, but it's possible." She didn't draw every night anymore. She drew in daylight now. By the window, with the shutters open. One afternoon, the steward entered to deliver a message and caught sight of a sketch in progress, a young woman, brushing her teeth with sage, and a hint of mischief on her face. He froze. "My lady," he said slowly. Is this meant to be a joke?" "No," Eleanor said. "It's meant to be honest." Whispers began again. "Lady Eleanor paints strange things. Lady Eleanor eats full meals. Lady Eleanor walks without her veil in the orchard. Some called it a phase. Others called it scandal. Her father called it ungratefulness." She was summoned again to his study. He didn't shout. He didn't strike her. He simply held up a letter from House Varnier. "They've withdrawn interest," he said. "The lord you danced with found you too forward." I didn't speak. "You didn't need to." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Then he was too delicate. You're ruining your own future." She nodded. "Then let me ruin it properly." That evening, she dressed in the ceremonial blue once more. But this time, she let her eyebrows show. Her cheeks were bare, her lips unpainted. She walked into the great hall during supper and sat at her father's right hand. The guests stared. She did not explain. She picked up her fork and ate the entire meal. The next morning came cold and clouded, despite the turn of spring. The wind blew low through the orchard, rattling the ivy and lifting the edge of Eleanor's wool cloak as she walked alone between the rows of budding pear trees. Her boots pressed into the soft soil, her breath visible in the damp air. She had always loved this part of the estate, not for its beauty, but because it was the only place where no one followed her. Not until today. She heard Juliet's steps before. She saw her. Her cousin was not quiet, not even when she meant to be. Eleanor paused and turned toward her. "I thought you hated mud," Eleanor said. Juliet shrugged. "I hate silence more. You're not talking to anyone." "I've said everything I wanted?" "No. You said what you were supposed to." "That's not the same thing." Eleanor looked away. "I wore the blue. I did what was required. You didn't powder your face." "No." "You didn't lower your eyes." "No." "You didn't flatter the priest. You didn't charm the guests. You didn't ask for forgiveness." "I didn't." Juliet stepped closer. "And how did it feel?" Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but the truth didn't come easily. She looked up instead toward the tree branches overhead, where the blossoms were still tightly curled against the cold. It felt like standing in a storm. "Without a cloak," she said. "Awful. Honest. And I didn't freeze." Juliet smiled softly. "Then maybe that's a sign." By week's end, Lord Felix had summoned a seamstress. Not for Eleanor, but for Juliet. The household buzzed with the news. Lady Margaret's daughter had caught the eye of a visiting young earl, a man who had apparently been too intimidated by Eleanor's stillness but found Juliet's charm easier to manage. The engagement would not be formalized until midsummer, but the intention was clear. Eleanor watched it unfold from the gallery above the main hall, a charcoal pencil in hand, and a blank sheet balanced across her knees. She did not draw the guests. She did not draw Juliet's new dress, or the Earl's bright feathered cap. She drew a girl standing in an orchard, mouth open to speak, but the wind stealing her words. She called the sketch, almost down below. Her father stood stiffly by the wine table. Lady Margaret whispered beside him. They looked not disappointed, but recalculating. Eleanor was not the plan anymore. She had become a veritable, too visible, Too quiet. Too full of sharp edges and soft truths. She didn't mind. Not anymore. Letters continued to arrive, most from lesser houses. A few from religious orders, curious if she might reconsider the cloister. Her father left them, unopened on her desk. One afternoon, she opened one herself. It was from a minor court artist in Chartres, who had seen one of her sketches during a visit, and wished to purchase it for copying. Your study of a woman chewing fennel seeds. The letter read, was unlike anything I have seen. She is not idealized. She is simply true. If you have others, I would gladly pay. Eleanor folded the letter slowly, not because it was flattering, but because it was real. Someone had seen her, not the painted version, not the pale bride, her, that night. She walked the halls with a candle in hand and slipped the letter into the drawer beneath. Her mirror, the silver one Aldrich had sent. She still hadn't used it, not once. She hadn't needed to. Her own eyes, it seemed, had begun to work again. The household changed in small ways after that. Servants knocked before entering her room, as if afraid of what version of her might answer. Lady Margaret sent fewer summons. Her father made fewer comments. Juliet, once always chatty, had become almost reverent in her presence, like Eleanor, with something raw and glowing that could not be touched without consequence. On the eve of Juliet's betrothal feast, the two girls sat by the hearth, their chairs angled like compass points. "Do you envy me now?" Juliet asked. Eleanor shook her head. "I never did." Juliet didn't smile. "Even when you were painted and plucked and perfect. I was never perfect. I was prepared. There's a difference." Juliet played with a loose thread at her sleeve. "Do you think I'm weak for wanting this?" "No. I think you're brave, in your own way." They sat in silence for a while. Then Juliet asked, "What will you do now?" Eleanor turned her head. "What I want. Isn't that dangerous? Probably. But so is everything else." Summer came slow and bright, ripening the orchard and softening the walls with light. By then, Eleanor had turned her chamber into a gallery of sorts. Drawings covered her desk. Some were sold, some sent off to other artists who traded her coins, books, or tools in exchange. None bore her full name, just a letter E. Lady Margaret called it a phase. Lord Felix called it embarrassment. But they no longer tried to stop her, because something strange had happened. Eleanor had become interesting, not marketable, not docile, but fascinating in a way the court hadn't expected. Rumors of her work reached artists, thinkers, even a few noblewomen who secretly requested sketches of themselves as they truly were, not beautiful, just real. One such woman was Lady Aline of Maremont, known for her frank tongue and widow's fortune. She visited Eleanor, unannounced one morning, arriving with 2 guards and a lapdog wrapped in green silk. "I want you to draw me," she said. Eleanor looked up from her paper. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being remembered the wrong way." They spoke for 2 hours. Eleanor did not powder her guest's cheeks. She did not erase the lines by her mouth. She did not narrow her jaw or raise her brow or lighten her eyes. She drew her as she sat, with one hand resting on the dog and the other curled in her lap, a ring gleaming beneath wrinkled skin. When she finished, Lady Aline studied the sketch. With narrowed eyes, "I look old." "You are." "I look like I've lived too long." "You have." Lady Aline looked up and grinned. "It's perfect." She paid double. That night, Eleanor finally unwrapped the silver mirror. She set it on the windowsill, letting moonlight glint off its surface. For the first time, she looked into it and saw herself bare, quiet, unpainted, no veil, no chalk, no expectation. She stared a long time, then slowly, she smiled. With teeth no one was watching, which meant the smile was real. By midsummer, Eleanor's reputation had taken on a shape of its own, part whisper, part wildfire. Some called her the unpainted lady. Others, more cruelly, called her the reluctant bride, the skeptic, even the ghost of Garrett Hall. What none of them called her any more was eligible, and Eleanor, reclining in the sun-drenched window of her chamber with a brush in hand and a sheet of fresh vellum, could not have cared less. Requests for her drawings had grown. Discreet at first, anonymously signed letters sealed in beeswax, but soon bolder. A duchess sent her a gold ring in exchange for a portrait of her daughter's real laugh. A steward from Bruges requested a sketch of his aging mother's hands. Too arthritic, now 2-plate bread, but still strong with memory. Eleanor signed each piece the same way, a capital E, and nothing else. Not Eleanor of House Garet, not Lady Eleanor, just E. It felt like carving her name from the long corridor of her ancestors and pinning it, alone, to the wall. That afternoon, as the sky burned soft blue above the chapel towers, Juliet burst into the room without knocking. "They're coming," she said. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "I'll need more than a pronoun." Juliet paced once, then twice. Lady Renata, and her son. Eleanor set down her brush. The one who refused 5 offers. 7 now, Juliet said grimly. "And your name's back on the list." They arrived at dusk, in a black lacquered carriage, pulled by horses as white as salt. Renata stepped out first, wrapped in a cloak of gold-threaded sable. Behind her came her son, Lord Ambrose of Marvoa, tall man with sharp angles and an expression that looked like it had never once cracked into laughter. He bowed before Eleanor, as she stood at the top of the entry steps. "Lady Eleanor," he said, "it is a pleasure." She curtsied slowly. "We'll see." The feast that followed was full of performance. Ambrose said little, but watched much. He moved with the stillness of a man who weighed every word before it escaped his throat. He complimented her father's wine, nodded graciously to Lady Margaret, and said nothing of Eleanor's face. She was grateful for that, at least. Later, in the candlelit drawing room, they sat by the harp as Renata and Felix toasted trade routes and future heirs. Ambrose turned to her. "You're not what I expected." Eleanor sipped her wine. "Good. I thought you'd be pale." "I was once. I thought you'd be quiet." "I was once." He looked at her, his eyes a shade too flat to be called warm. Now, I choose what to be." Ambrose gave the faintest tilt of his mouth, almost a smile, but not quite. "And you draw?" "I do. I've seen your work." Eleanor's back stiffened. "You have. My sister has 3 of your pieces. One hangs in her nursery." Eleanor blinked. "She never wrote her name. She wouldn't. Our father forbade it. But she showed me your signature. The E." Ambrose leaned forward. "They say you're rebellious. That you've refused 6 suitors." "Not refused," she corrected. "They simply never saw me." He nodded. "Would you want them to?" "No," she said. "I want them to leave me be." He straightened. "And if someone did see you, then I'd be surprised." After they left, Eleanor stood at her window and watched the carriage lights disappear down the old Roman road. Her father approached before she could return to her sketches. "You impressed him," he said, a mixture of triumph and confusion in his voice. "Did I?" "He wants to return next week. He's asked for a private portrait sitting." "Of himself?" "No, of you." Eleanor frowned. "What for?" "He says he wants to remember you as you are." She turned to him. "Then he should hire a poet." "Not a painter." Felix's brow tightened. "He's serious, Eleanor." "So am I." He stared at her for a moment, as if seeing her as a riddle he had once solved and now forgotten the answer to. The next day, Eleanor walked to the village. It wasn't a thing she did often, not because it was forbidden, but because it was discouraged. A lady should not be seen wandering among mud and merchants. Her mother used to say. But Eleanor liked the sound of carts, the scent of bread, the uneven rhythm of real life. At the market square, she found old Muriel, the herb woman with 6 missing teeth and a voice like crushed gravel. "You look like you've seen something you can't name," Muriel said, as Eleanor approached. "I have. Name it anyway." "A man who wants to remember me." Muriel snorted. "So he doesn't have to understand you, then?" Eleanor blinked. "Exactly," the old woman grinned. "Bring him here next time. Let me mix him a memory worth keeping. Something bitter and strong." Eleanor laughed out loud. It was the first time in days. When Ambrose returned the following week, he came alone. He arrived, without guards, without servants, without fanfare. Just a satchel and a book of poems. I asked my mother to stay behind, he said. She's displeased. Good, Eleanor said. Now we can speak properly. They sat in the orchard, beneath the bent boughs of the pear trees. Eleanor brought her sketchbook. Ambrose brought silence. She drew his hands first. Long, pale, calloused. You write, she said. I fence, he replied. Fencing leaves bruises. Yes, writing leaves scars. She looked up at him. Have you been hurt? I was raised by Lady Renata, he said, and I once tried to smile at a ball. She laughed. That counts. He watched her laugh, eyes steady. Then he said, Draw yourself. No, why not? Because I see myself every day. I want to remember things I'll forget. Like the way you grip that poem too tightly, or how you speak less, when you care more. He swallowed. Then you do see me. I do. As the afternoon waned, Eleanor added the last stroke to her sketch and closed the book. Ambrose leaned forward. May I see? No. Why not? Because this one is for me. He studied her face. Do you know how rare you are? Yes, she said softly, and I'm tired of being treated like a relic. He reached out and gently touched the edge of the book. Then let me be a witness, not a collector. Eleanor considered him for a long time, then nodded. That night, she opened a fresh page. She drew herself not idealized, not haunted, not powdered or saintly. Just Eleanor, eyebrows dark, lips parted, hands stained with ink. She signed the bottom. Eleanor Garet for the first time. The whole name. She slid the page into the silver mirror's drawer and closed it with a small, quiet smile. The world had not softened, but she had sharpened, and tomorrow she would begin again. The week after Ambrose left, the days turned slow and golden, the kind of gentle summer Eleanor had always imagined, but rarely lived. There were no balls, no suitors, no sermons about modesty or virtue, or what shade of rouge was most pious. Instead, there were mornings of sketching in the orchard, and evenings curled beside the hearth, with books Juliet had smuggled in from her betrothed's library. But silence, Eleanor had learned, was never permanent, especially not in noble houses. The silence broke the day her father received a letter from the court at Rouen. A formal invitation sealed with a red wax emblem and upcoming exhibition of the kingdom's most accomplished and spiritually appropriate portraiture. It was, in short, a royal gallery. And Eleanor's name was among those requested to submit a piece. I didn't ask for this, she told her father as he set the letter before her. He raised his eyebrows. It's not a punishment. No, she said. It's worse. It's approval. Lady Margaret entered just then, lace veil fluttering like the wings of a moth. You should be honored, child, she said. They are recognizing your talent. No, Eleanor said evenly. They're trying to own it. Margaret clicked her tongue. And what do you plan to do? Decline. I plan to decide. That evening, she returned to the orchard with her sketchbook, not to draw, but to think. The trees had begun to droop under the weight of young fruit, the branches bent like tired dancers. She sat cross-legged beneath the oldest tree, the one she had climbed as a child, and stared up at the swaying leaves. Ambrose had written once since he left, just a short letter. No wax seal, no titles, just I hope you're still drawing. No promises, no riddles. No wait. She had read it 6 times. A gust of wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, a dog barked once, then fell quiet. She thought of the invitation. She thought of the other artistmen, mostly who would send in work that flattened women into saints and girls into dolls. No pores, no weight, no shadows under their eyes. What would it mean to hang beside them? Not a rebellion, not an endorsement, just a challenge. She opened her sketchbook, not to start the piece, but to name it. She wrote, at the top of a blank page, portrait of a girl who refused to vanish. The days leading up to the exhibition were hectic. Servants bustled. Her father paced. Juliet argued with the tailor about whether Eleanor should wear slate or storm gray. She can't go dressed like she's off to milk a goat, she hissed. She's not going as a bride, Eleanor replied. I'll wear what doesn't. In the end, She chose a simple dove-colored gown, with no corset and sleeves loose enough to paint in. She pinned a single silver hair comb above her ear, the only gift her mother had ever given her, with no agenda. The painting she prepared was large, too large for the travel case, so they transported it on the back of a covered cart, wrapped in linen and protected with straw. Lord Felix did not see it before they left, nor did Margaret. Only Juliet stood beside her the night before departure, watching as Eleanor laid the final varnish over the surface. "She looks like you," Juliet whispered. "She is me." Juliet reached out, but didn't touch the canvas. "Will they understand?" "No." "Then why send it?" Eleanor met her cousin's eyes. "Because one day, someone might." The gallery at Rouen was colder than she expected. The hall itself was vast, lined with thick columns and marble statues, most of them depicting saints with empty eyes and lips pressed like secrets. The air smelled of wax, rosewater, and expensive silence. Her piece was hung at the far end, opposite a massive triptych of St. Agnes. Between them, a dozen works stretched along the wall. Ladies with prayerful gazes, young women holding lilies, or crucifixes, or doves. And at the end, Eleanor's portrait, a young woman with dark brows, one lock of hair untamed, her gaze angled just off-center, like she had been interrupted in thought. She wore no crown, no cross, no colors of royalty. Her fingers were ink-stained, her skin uneven, her mouth slightly open, and she looked defiant, not angry, not smug. But there was weight in her eyes, not the weight of tears, the weight of presence. People stared, some nodded thoughtfully, others passed quickly, lips pursed. One lady covered her daughter's eyes. Eleanor watched from a distance. Then someone stepped beside her. "You gave her too much chin," he said. She turned. It was a short man in priest's robes, holding a small pamphlet and a cane. "She doesn't look saintly enough," he added. "She's not a saint," Eleanor said. "She's not smiling." "No," Eleanor replied, "because I painted her honestly." The priest sniffed. "Honesty is not the aim of art." "Then your gallery is full of ghosts." He blinked, startled, but said nothing more. She walked away. Ambrose arrived the next day. He found her standing in the quiet side chamber, reserved for sketches, looking at a series of ink portraits of dead queens. "Yours has caused a stir," he said, without greeting. "I thought it might. They're calling you bold." Eleanor didn't turn. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Both." She smiled, then finally looked at him. "You came back," she said. "I did. Why?" He hesitated. "Because I wanted to see the painting. It's on the wall." He shook his head. "Not that one." She frowned. "Then which?" "The one you said was for you." She blinked. "I never showed anyone. Not yet." He reached into his coat and handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing of her sitting in the orchard, eyes half lost in thought, knees drawn up, brush in one hand. Sunlight scattered across her dress. It was unfinished. "I'm not." "Very good," he said. She stared at it, heart strangely aching. "No," she said. "You're better than good." She looked up. "You saw me." Ambrose smiled. "Of course I did. That's why I stayed." They walked through the gallery side by side. Some stared. Some whispered. One old duchess pointed and said, "Is that her? The girl in the painting?" And someone else said, "No, that's the girl who painted it." Eleanor paused, let the words settle like dust. Then she stepped forward, toward the canvas, toward her own name, printed in fine lettering on the brass. Plate below, Eleanor Garet. She raised her chin. Her painting did not smile, but she did. 2 weeks after the exhibition, Eleanor's portrait was still being talked about in every corridor, where women whispered and men pretended not to listen. Some called it sacrilege, others called it brilliance, and a few thought rare, dangerous. Who called it true? Her father received 3 letters requesting commissioned work from Eleanor, 2 from noble households in Aquitaine, and 1 from the Queen's own secretary. He read them aloud over supper, his voice neutral. "It seems the court prefers you in oils." Eleanor reached for the bread. "Do they prefer what I painted?" or that I dared paint it?" Lady Margaret scowled behind her cup. "Both. They like their rebels tasteful." Juliet, ever the flame to Margaret's frost, leaned forward. "Are you going to answer?" Eleanor shrugged. Eventually, she wasn't in a rush. The painting had changed something, not just in her reputation, but in herself. It felt as though she'd left part of her spirit on that canvas, something she couldn't take back, even if she wanted to, and she didn't want to. But the world, she knew, was not built to love what it could not own. That knowledge arrived the next day, in the form of a sealed scroll bearing the royal emblem. The king's own hand had summoned her to court to paint, a likeness of the crown prince's betrothed. "I don't understand," Eleanor muttered, pacing the great hall. Juliet trailed behind, trying to catch up. "What's to understand? You're being invited to paint royalty." "I'm being summoned," Eleanor said, spitting the word like it tasted sour. "Not invited. It's still an honor. It's still a trap." Juliet caught her arm. "Then don't go." Eleanor looked at her, startled. "You don't mean that." "I do," Juliet said, her voice low. "If going means silencing yourself again, if it means painting what they want instead of what you see, then don't. You're not a mirror, Elle." Eleanor exhaled, spine taut. "No, I'm not." "But," Juliet added, voice softening, "if you can go and still be youth, then maybe that's the boldest thing you could do." 3 days later, Eleanor stood before the gates of Montclair Palace. The towers reached into the sky like fingers, asking for something they'd never grasp. The marble archways gleamed white and cold. Every servant moved like a breath held too long. She was escorted past the painted halls, past the gold-leaf ceilings, past statues of queens she had studied in books. Finally, they led her into a high-ceilinged chamber, lined with tapestries and pale stone. There, beneath a window open to the scent of early roses, sat the subject she was to paint, Princess Eleanor of Tours, a girl of 16. Barely she looked up at Eleanor, and did not smile. Eleanor bowed. Eleanor did not move. "Do you want to be painted?" Eleanor asked quietly. Eleanor blinked. "Do you want to paint me?" That wasn't the answer she'd expected. Eleanor hesitated. "Not if it's against your will." Eleanor's mouth twitched. "You're the only one who's asked me that. Over." The next week, Eleanor painted her in fragments. A sleeve here, the arch of a brow, the way her hands folded when she was pretending not to be afraid. They spoke little, but what words passed between them held more weight than any court ceremony. "Do you like being here?" Eleanor asked one morning. Eleanor smoothed her gown. "I like the gardens. And the prince. I haven't met him." Eleanor blinked. "Truly," Eleanor nodded. "He's abroad, fighting in Castile." Eleanor frowned. "Then why rush your portrait?" Eleanor glanced at the window. "Because the queen wants to hang me next to him before he returns, so that when he walks into the gallery, he sees me smiling." Eleanor lowered her brush. "And will you smile?" "Should I?" Eleanor thought for a long moment. "Only if it's yours." On the final day, Eleanor presented the finished painting to the queen and her council. They gathered in a private salon, gilded with dragon-carved chairs and velvet drapery. The queen sat at the center, hands folded like stone lilies. Eleanor unveiled the canvas. There was silence. Princess Eleanor was not smiling, but her eyes were alive. She sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap. Her gown was understated, the color of deep-sea glass. Her hair curled naturally. The background showed not a throne, not a chapel, but a single open window, and the trace of wind in her hair. She looked like a girl waiting, not for a prince, but for her own life to begin. The queen's expression was unreadable. One of the courtiers cleared his throat. "It lacks majesty." "It holds something rarer," Eleanor said. "It holds truth." The queen spoke finally. "Leave us." The room emptied. Even Eleanor was ushered out. Eleanor stood alone before the queen. The woman rose. "You are bold. I am honest. You understand your role here. To paint the future queen. To prepare her image," the queen corrected. "For the world. For power." Eleanor lifted her chin. She deserves to be seen before she is adorned." The queen stared at her for a long moment. Then, with one finger, she tapped the lower corner of the frame. "Sign it," she said. Eleanor hesitated. "With what?" "Your full name." Eleanor reached into her satchel, pulled a brush, and dipped it in ink. She hesitated only a second longer. Then she signed, Eleanor Garet, back in her chamber. She found a letter tucked beneath her sketchbook. No sealed odd, just a folded note. "You made her look free. That is the most dangerous gift of all." Eleanor smiled. She looked out the window. The roses below were starting to bloom, and somewhere, perhaps, the world was shifting one brushstroke at a time. The portrait of Princess Alais was hung in the East Gallery of Montclair Palace a fortnight after its completion. Courtiers came in clusters to view it, whispering their judgments in the hush of marble corridors. Some called it heretical, others revolutionary. A few called it beautiful, in a way they didn't know how to name. Eleanor did not stay to hear any of it. She was already gone, with Juliet's help. She packed her paints, her sketchbooks, and her resolve into 2 simple leather trunks. Lord Felix tried to stop her with gentle threats and guilt-laced speeches about legacy and family. Margaret refused even to see her off. Juliet wept and kissed both her cheeks. "Promise me you'll write." "I promise," Eleanor said. "And if I can't write, I'll draw." "Where will you go?" Eleanor looked at the horizon. "Where I'm not already framed." Her first stop was a monastery on the outskirts of Lyon, where she traded a month's labor for permission to study. An illuminated manuscript known for its rare depictions of women not as saints, but as scribes. She slept on a straw mattress and painted by candlelight. She spoke little, listened much, and filled an entire sketchbook with handwriting, holding, resisting. From there she traveled east, where in a quiet town near the Rhine, she painted a baker's daughter for a loaf of cherry bread and the story of a lost sister. She spent 3 days listening, 1 to painting, and then she moved on. Word of her work traveled faster than she did. People began to leave scraps of parchment pinned to doors where she passed. "The girl with the mirror brush was here," they said, or "the portrait painter who sees through veils." Some were kind. Some warned her to stay away, but always someone was waiting. A young widow with a child, too poor for oil, but rich in stories. A former nun turned herbalist. An old knight who wanted to be drawn not in armor, but in his orchard, among his apples. She never signed her works in the corner again. Instead, she etched a small symbol in the folds of a garment, or the curve of a shadow, a single open eye. A watching, a witness. Not a signature. A promise. It was nearly a year before she saw Ambrose again. He found her in a small coastal village on the cliffs of Brittany, painting the sea into a fisherman's widow's shutters. He wore travel-worn boots and a satchel of parchment. His smile was unchanged. "I thought you'd be in Paris by now," he said. "I was. Briefly. They tried to make you court painter. They tried to make me quiet." He laughed, then turned to the half-painted shutters. "You gave the waves too much green," he said, teasing. "No," she said. "They gave me just enough." They stood in silence a while. Then he asked, "Are you staying?" She shook her head. "Not long." "Where to?" She shrugged. "There's talk of a village in the north, where they've never had a portraitist, not even once." He nodded. "Do you want company?" Eleanor tilted her head. "Can you carry a canvas?" He smiled. "I can try." One autumn evening, in a town where no one knew their names, Eleanor set up her easel in the village square and began to paint not a person, but a crowd faces she had only glimpsed, imagined, or dreamed. Boy chasing a dog. An old woman smiling to herself. A girl staring boldly back at the viewer, her cheeks full, her eyebrows intact. She called it, "The Ones Who Stayed Real." A merchant offered to buy it. She declined. She hung it in the local chapel instead, where the Virgin Mary once hung, and told the priest that, if he wanted to protest, he'd have to sit for a portrait first. He didn't. Years passed. Some of her early paintings faded. Others were destroyed. The court forgot her name. But the people remembered her mark. In tiny villages and border towns, In kitchens and chapels, there remained portraits of real people, soft, flawed, strong. Eleanor never stopped painting. She grew older. Her hands began to ache. Her vision blurred in winter. But still, she painted. And one day, as the sea air turned cold and the orchard near her cottage bore its last apples, she sat down before a mirror, not the warped bronze of her youth, but one hand cut by a glassmaker who owed her a favor, and studied her own reflection. She saw the faint lines beside her eyes, the specks of paint still trapped beneath her fingernails, the silver in her hair, and the steadiness in her gaze. She lifted her brush and painted her last portrait, not idealized, not serene, not saintly, but her, exactly as she was. She didn't call it anything. She didn't sign it. She simply left it on the easel, unframed, unclaimed, and above it, pinned to the wall, a single note written in her own hand. Let them say what they will. I was here,